Setting up and using certifications. Certifications may be set to help with ensuring that suppliers and companies being used on a contract have the current and valid certification for the goods being ordered, or in the case of a subcontractor, for the works being carried out. If a contract has a certification listed that the supplier or subcontractor does not hold or is expired, the system will then prevent the purchase order from being placed. So we have to set up these classifications, and that's done in the certifications area of the classifications. Now you'll notice that FFC, PEFC and standard contract will be added by default, but you may need to indicate that FSC and PEFC applies to company. Then add any other required certifications and indicate those that apply to a supplier or subcontractor. Now, if you need to delete an entry, simply double click on the line and you'll be given a screen where it may be deleted. To activate the certifications checking, you'll need to go to the system settings and the production settings and ensure that the enforce certification checks for supplier and subcontractors is checked. Now, if this is not checked, certifications will still be displayed and you can still search for them, but they won't be enforced when placing purchase orders. So on adding or amending a supplier or subcontractor, assuming that the certifications have been set up, the ones that are indicated as applies to company will be listed in the certification table. And if the certification setting is switched on in your system settings, all of these will be set to relevant, and you'll need to deselect the ones that do not apply to the company. Obviously, once you've been through and deselected the ones that don't apply, they won't reselect. It's only on creating a new company, or if you haven't loaded the company since this new version. So this will ensure that when a purchase order is being placed with the company, if the contract is required to be carried out to a certain certification, if the company does not hold that required certification or it's expired, the system will not allow the purchase order to be placed. Now, any issues with a company certification may be addressed directly from the purchase order entry by simply clicking the Amend View Supplier Details button. This will then take you to the company details screen where any necessary amendments to the certifications may be made. Also, a useful feature here is by double clicking on the FFC or PEFC line, it will start your browser to the relevant certification site and you can check the settings. Now again, the system will have already placed the company's name on the pasteboard, so you could just paste that into their search area. And then assuming the company is located, with the certificates will be displayed with the dates that they're valid to. So then any adjustments may be made to the certifications held to enable the purchase order to be completed. On returning to the purchase order, you'll see the relevant certification listed with a valid date, and therefore the purchase order may now be placed with the company. There's also now a facility to list companies with the FFC or PFC certification, or those with expired certificates, or those with certificates about to expire, and this is located in the standard search area for the companies. For more information about contract control, obviously go to our website, but now we're going to look at setting up and using the certifications in a live presentation. Okay, so let's look at all of this in a live situation. If I go to my system administration, set system defaults, classifications, we can see here our listing of contract certification types. And as we were saying earlier, your FFC and your PFC may well not have had applies to company ticked. So we just simply need to tick that. So that means that whenever we create a new company or an amended company, they will appear as an option. We can then tick other options that we want to appear as well. If I want to add a new contract certification, simply click Add New, type in the description, save and finished, and it'll then be on the list, and then we can decide whether it applies to a company or not. The difference between there is if we click applies to company, it means whenever I'm placing a purchase order, if a contract has that certification listed, then the company must have the applicable certificate for that. Otherwise, the purchase order will be rejected. But it might be that you still want a contract carried out to certain certifications that aren't necessarily affected by a company that you're buying goods from or a subcontractor that you're using. So once you've set all those up, if we click finish to come back to our dashboard. Now, at the moment, we haven't got the certifications as an enforced situation. So if we go to System Administration, System Defaults, and System Settings, and go to our production settings, you can see there that enforced certifications is not checked. So we'll still be able to use and list our certifications, but it just means that if a contract has a certain certification and a supplier that is using doesn't, or the certification's expired, it will still allow that purchase order to be placed. So we'll leave that unchecked at the moment. So let's see what difference that makes to our companies. So if I was to add a new company now, you'll see by default, it brings in all those certifications that had the applies to company ticked, but it won't class them as relevant. And what I would need to do then is say, yes, they are particularly relevant to that company. Now, if I come back out of this and switch the enforced certifications on, whenever I create a new company, you'll see the certification is still added, but now they're all ticked as relevant to force the user to say which isn't relevant. So it's sort of making sure that as a user creates a new company, because you're using the certifications, generally everything has a certification requirement, so that if a user forgets to put that on, by default, when you try and raise a purchase order, if it hasn't got a renewal date or a current date, then it will be rejected. So if we click cancel for that. Now let's look at how that reacts within a purchase order. So if I turn off the certification, so if I go to System Settings, Production, and turn the enforced certification off, and then let's just look at some of our suppliers. So if I look at Latham's in Leeds, we can see that we've got an FFC requirement, but the renewal date of that certificate is out of date. Okay, but because the enforcement switched off, it will still allow the purchase order to be placed. So if I come out of that and then create a purchase order for Latham's, and we type in the contract 260, you can see it allows that to be placed, even though it has got certification, but it's out of date. Now, if I cancel that and switch our certification on, and do exactly the same thing. So create a new purchase order, select Latham's in Leeds, and now try and create there. Well, now tells us that the company's certificate renewal date, FSC, has expired. So it allowed me to add the line, but it won't let me actually process and issue the purchase order because we've got an error. Now, as we said in the video earlier, to correct that, we can simply say amend or view supplier details. We could then find out if the certificate was up to date or not, as we said, simply by double clicking on that line, and it will bring the FFC website up. Just drag that over to here, so you can see that we get the search there. Now, because the system knows what company we're in, if I just paste there and take that off and do the search, they will then search that, and then we can see what certificate they've got and what date the renewal is. So we can see there that all of their certificates are valid till the 14th of the 7th, 2024. So I can then go back and amend this date to the required date. Now, if I remove that line and then reload it, we don't get the error because it all falls into the certification criteria. So we clear that. Now, if we look at some of our past contracts, we might need to do a bit of housekeeping. So if I look at one of my earlier jobs and I go to my contract details, you can see the certification requirement might be set to the old system. So we've got PECF type material that needs to be corrected. So simply remove that, bring it back in by selecting from the list, and you can see that it's now corrected from there. So that's with any contract. If you want to remove any of the certifications that have been added, simply click on them, remove them, and then you can bring them back in from the list. So we can say, okay, well, it's now ISO 140. If you try and bring in the same one twice, it will tell you that it already exists. And then just simply click finished and saved. So that will tidy up any of your existing contracts before you start to place any purchase orders. A new facility that's come in is to search for all companies that have the certifications and their renewal dates. So if I search for companies, so I'm using F9, or just go to customers, suppliers, subcontractors, and say list amend and search all companies. See, now we have these additional filters. Search all companies that have a current FFC certificate. We simply click on that and click search, and the system will bring up a list. We could bring up a list of those that are due to expire next month. So it just brings a one, so it displays it, so we can see that that's due. And ones that have expired or have got a certification but haven't been given a date. We get a listing from them there. You could also filter these with any of this criteria. So if I want to say, okay, show me any companies with Latham's that have expired, it will filter that out so we don't find any. If we find anyone that Latham's that are due to expire next month, we find the one. If we want to filter all FSC certificates just with the word Latham in there, we can filter it that way. And you've got exactly the same functionality for PECF. And that's basically all there is to the contract certifications.